When you think of the United States Army, you probably think of unity, right? Teamwork, a shared mission. It's one of the most powerful, unified organizations on Earth. But what if I told you that just beneath that surface, there's an invisible wall? A subtle but incredibly powerful force that separates its members. Today, we're going to figure out what builds that wall. So that's the big question we're tackling. In an organization that relies so heavily on cohesion, what is it that creates this deep social divide between commissioned officers and enlisted personnel? A divide that, as we'll see, stretches out to affect their families too. Now, the person who dug into all of this is Dr. Ronnie Rodas, and his perspective is pretty unique. See, he's not just a Ph.D. researcher. He's also a U.S. Army sergeant and a combat veteran. He has actually lived inside the very system he's studying, which gives his work some serious real-world weight. So where does this separation begin? Well, the first piece of the puzzle is found in the rules of engagement. Both the official policies and, maybe more importantly, the unwritten perceptions that guide how soldiers interact every single day. Dr. Rodas's research kicks off by looking at the Army's fraternization policies. These are the official rules designed to keep relationships between different ranks, professional, to maintain order and discipline. But the real question is, how do these rules actually play out in the social lives of soldiers and their families? And this is where it gets really interesting. You've got the official policy, and then you've got the reality. Officially, Army Regulations 620 is all about soldier-to-soldier relationships. It says nothing about their families not being able to hang out. But in the real world, leaders are super cautious. They often avoid socializing with the families of people under their command just to avoid even the slightest hint of favoritism. It's called perception management, and it ends up creating a social barrier that the rules themselves never actually put there. But look, this isn't just about modern-day policies. This separation is baked into the Army's history and its culture, with traditions that are still echoing today. This timeline just lays it out so clearly. For decades, you had completely separate clubs for officers and for NCOs, that's non-commissioned officers. These were literally parallel social universes. And yeah, in 2016, the Army started moving toward integrated, all-ranks facilities, which is a huge step. But that cultural memory, that historical habit of separation, it's powerful. The physical walls might be gone, but the social ones, they tend to stick around. And that cultural legacy is so strong that it creates these ghost restrictions. The research found that even when spouse clubs officially open their doors to everyone, a lot of people still believe there are unwritten rules preventing them from mixing. The culture of separation basically becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's kind of wild. Okay, so that brings us to the third pillar, and this one might be the most concrete of all, economics. Because in the military, your rank doesn't just decide your job, it directly shapes your environment and your everyday life. Let's follow the money. Just take a look at this chart. It's showing the basic allowance for housing, or BAH. The difference between ranks is significant. A junior enlisted soldier gets a much lower housing allowance than a junior officer, who gets less than a senior officer. And believe me, this isn't just a number on a payslip. This number dictates where you can afford to live and the quality of that life. And here's exactly how that pay gap turns into real-world physical separation. The research shows that privatized housing on military posts is often organized into different neighborhoods based on rank. So you literally end up with communities of junior enlisted families living in one area and officer families living in another, often with a pretty visible difference in the quality of the homes themselves. And the impact of this economic gap can be really severe. This statement here, which sums up findings from big reports by the Government Accountability Office and the RAND Corporation, paints a really stark picture. We're talking about junior enlisted soldiers dealing with major issues in their barracks, mold, broken HVAC systems, pests. It's a powerful reminder that these economic policies have very real, very tangible consequences. So we have these pillars of policy, culture, and economics, but they don't exist in a bubble. Dr. Rodas's research takes this a step further, arguing that the Army's social structure is actually a microcosm, a reflection of much bigger theories about society itself. For example, if you look at this through the lens of conflict theory, an idea heavily associated with Karl Marx, the officer-enlisted divide looks a lot like a structural class system. The officers, with more pay, power, and resources, act as a dominant class, while the enlisted personnel represent a subordinate one. From this perspective, the entire system is set up to maintain that hierarchy. Social stratification theory adds another fascinating layer. This idea from Max Weber says it's not just about money and power, but also about status and prestige. Officers traditionally hold higher prestige, which is reflected in special privileges and social networks. This, in turn, reinforces the social distance from the enlisted ranks, making those invisible walls even thicker. So, after looking at all these different factors, we're left with a pretty critical question. What does this whole system of separation actually mean for the future of the U.S. Army? So let's quickly recap the three core pillars that Dr. Rodis's research identified. First, you have regulation, the official policies and the perception of them that create social caution. Second, there's culture, the historical traditions that keep these norms of separation going. And third, you have economics, the pay and housing system that literally builds physical separation into the daily lives of soldiers and their families. And this brings us to the final and most critical question of all. The nature of warfare is changing. It's more complex, it's more decentralized, and it demands seamless collaboration at every single level. So, with that in mind, can a modern military really afford any kind of division, visible or invisible, within its ranks? Can it afford these walls? It's a question with some pretty profound implications. This explainer was based on the insightful and important research conducted by Dr. Ronnie Rodis. Thank you for joining us.